The mid-afternoon sun beat down on the tarmac of Naval Air Station North Island, casting long, sharp shadows from the hulking C-130 Hercules transport plane. The air, thick with the smell of jet fuel and sea salt, vibrated with the distant, rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors. For a group of fresh-faced ROTC cadets, this was the most exciting day of their young lives. They were about to hitch a ride on a real military transport, a small taste of the operational world they so desperately wanted to join. They jostled near the loading ramp, their crisp uniforms a stark contrast to the grimy, workhorse aircraft. Laughter and nervous chatter filled the air as they pointed at the plane's massive propellers, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and manufactured bravado. Their supervising officer, and a young lieutenant with a clipboard and an air of self-importance, was trying to organize the loading. It was then that a figure emerged from the base operations building and began walking purposefully toward the plane. She was a woman, somewhere in her late 30s, dressed not in a flight suit or an officer's uniform, but in plain, worn civilian clothes, faded jeans, scuffed combat boots, and a simple gray t-shirt that clung to a frame that was lean and corded with muscle. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her face, tanned and weathered, was etched with fine lines around the eyes, not from age, but from years of squinting into sun-scorched deserts and salt-sprayed oceans. She carried a single well-worn sea bag over one shoulder, its canvas faded and patched, looking as if it had been dragged through a dozen different countries. The cadet's chatter dimmed slightly as she approached. She didn't look like a pilot or a standard officer. She didn't look like anyone they knew. She walked with a quiet, fluid economy of motion, a coiled spring readiness that was invisible to their untrained eyes. All they saw was a middle-aged woman in civilian clothes, seemingly trying to board their military flight. As she neared the base of the loading ramp, one of the cadets, a broad-shouldered young man from Ohio named Kyle, stepped forward, blocking her path. He was the self-appointed leader of the group, the one who had gotten the highest marks in physical training and wasn't afraid to show it. "Whoa, hold up," he said, his voice laced with a challenging smirk. He looked her up and down, and taking in her civilian attire. "I think you might be a little lost, ma'am. This is a military transport, for personnel." The woman stopped. She didn't flinch or react with surprise. She simply looked at Kyle, her gaze flat and unreadable, like still water before a storm. "I know what it is," she said, her voice quiet and calm, carrying a slight, unplaceable rasp. She made to step around him. Another cadet, a wiry girl with sharp eyes named Sarah, who felt she had something to prove, stepped up beside Kyle. "He's just trying to help you," she said, her tone dripping with condescending politeness. "This is a restricted area. You can't just wander onto a flight line. There are protocols. Are you someone's wife? A civilian contractor? You need to check in at the main office." The woman stopped again, hefting her sea bag slightly. A flicker of something, amusement, exasperation, crossed her features, here, then gone. "My name is on the manifest," she stated simply. It was a statement of fact, not a plea. Kyle scoffed, emboldened by his friends. "Sure it is. Look, we're with the ROTC. This is a training flight for us. We don't have room for tag-alongs. There are strict seating assignments." He gestured vaguely at the plane. "It's full." The other cadets murmured in agreement, their collective identity as the future of the Navy, solidifying their stance against this outsider. They saw her as an anomaly, a disruption to their special day. A few of them snickered. One muttered something under his breath about people not knowing their place. The woman's eyes didn't narrow, her posture didn't stiffen. She remained perfectly still, a picture of absolute calm. But there was something in that stillness that was profoundly unsettling, a density of presence that seemed to suck the air out of the immediate space. She looked past the cadets, toward the plane's open ramp, then back at Kyle. "Son," she said, the word carrying no warmth, only the weight of unfathomable experience. "You're making a mistake." The condescension in her tone, the way she called him son, was the final straw for Kyle. His face flushed red. He puffed out his chest, feeling the eyes of his peers on him. This was his moment to be decisive, to show leadership. He stepped directly into her path, blocking her way entirely. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can just walk on. Get lost," he said, his voice loud and sharp, enjoying the sound of his own authority. He pointed a finger toward the base operations building. "Oh, go on. Get lost. Now." A heavy silence fell. The cadets watched, a mix of triumph and unease on their faces. Sarah smiled smugly. The lieutenant with the clipboard, who had been watching the entire scene unfold from the shade of the wing, finally decided to intervene. He didn't want a scene. He walked over, a practiced, officious look on his face. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, looking at the woman, his tone already implying he knew the answer. The woman turned her calm, flat gaze on him. The lieutenant was a prior enlisted man who had gone the officer route. He was a Mustang, and as he got within a few feet of her and looked into those eyes, something cold slithered down his spine. It wasn't anything she did. It was everything she didn't do. She didn't fidget, didn't look away, didn't explain. She just stood there, and a silent monument of controlled power. He saw the sea bag then, not just as an old piece of luggage, but as a piece of gear that had been used, hard. He saw the faded tattoo peeking out from under her t-shirt sleeve, a small, intricate trident. His brain, seasoned by years in the fleet, finally connected the dots faster than the cadets' inexperienced minds could. Before he could speak, a new voice boomed from the top of the loading ramp. "What in the blue hell is the holdup? We ain't got all day." Everyone looked up. A grizzled crew chief, a master sergeant with a chest full of service stripes and a face like a clenched fist, was leaning out of the plane's side door. He scanned the group below, his gaze landing on the woman. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. The scowl vanished, replaced by an expression of immediate and almost reverent respect. He scrambled down the ramp, moving with a speed that belied his years. He ignored the lieutenant and the cadets completely, walking straight up to the woman. He stood a little straighter, his shoulders going back. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now carrying a tone of profound deference. "My apologies for the delay. We weren't expecting you until the morning watch. We've got your usual spot cleared out, aft of the bulkhead. Can I take your bag?" The cadets stood frozen, their mouths agape. They stared, uncomprehending. This cantankerous senior NCO, who held the power of life and death over who got on his plane, was treating this woman in jeans like a visiting admiral. The woman, whose name they still didn't know, simply nodded once. "Thanks, Chief. I can manage." Her voice was still quiet, but now it carried an unmistakable weight. She began to walk up the ramp, and as she passed the shell-shocked Kyle, she paused. She didn't look at him, but spoke just loud enough for him and the others to hear. "The mistake you made," she said, her voice as flat and calm as before, "is you saw a woman in civilian clothes and assumed you saw a weakness. Never assume you know what's inside someone's sea bag, cadet, or inside them." She continued up into the belly of the great plane, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The lieutenant let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding and walked away, shaking his head. The cadets huddled together, whispering frantically. Kyle stood rooted to the spot, his face pale. The comfortable, ordered world of his ROTC hierarchy had just been violently upended by a quiet woman with a worn-out bag. And the adventure they had been so excited for had suddenly become something else entirely, a lesson they hadn't signed up for, taught by a master they couldn't yet comprehend. The whine of the Hercules' engines spooling up was the only sound, a deep, mechanical roar that seemed to echo the sudden, chaotic shift in their understanding. Inside the cavernous, dimly lit interior of the C-130, the world was a symphony of industrial noise and utilitarian function. The bare metal ribs of the fuselage curved overhead, lined with hydraulic lines and electrical conduits. The deck was a patchwork of non-slip metal plating. Rows of red nylon webbing seats, known as bucket seats, lined the sides, facing inward. The air smelled of hydraulic fluid, canvas, and the faint, lingering ghost of 1,000 previous cargoes. The cadets, and who had boarded in subdued silence, now sat huddled together on one side of the plane, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. They stole glances, not at each other, but at the solitary figure who had taken a seat on the opposite side, aft of a large metal bulkhead. The woman had settled into her spot with the ease of long habit. She hadn't chosen a seat, she had chosen a position. Her back was against the solid metal of the bulkhead, giving her a clear view of the entire cargo bay, including the main hatch. Her worn sea bag was tucked beside her, not stowed away, but within immediate reach. She didn't read a book or fiddle with a phone. She simply sat, her hands resting on her thighs, her eyes half closed, utterly still. She was a part of the plane now, another piece of specialized equipment, waiting. The master sergeant, at whose name was Chief Williams, made a point of walking past the cadets on his way to the cockpit. He paused, looking down at Kyle, whose face was still a mask of confusion and bruised pride. The chief's eyes were hard, chips of granite. "You cadets are from the university detachment, right?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that could just be heard over the engines. They nodded mutely. He leaned in closer. "Let me give you a piece of unsolicited advice. For the rest of this flight, you keep your mouths shut and your eyes open. That woman over there, she's forgotten more about service than your whole damn class will ever learn. You don't speak to her, you don't approach her. You got me?" "But Chief, who is she?" Sarah whispered, her earlier smugness replaced by a wide-eyed curiosity. Chief Williams straightened up, a complicated look on his face, a mixture of profound respect and deep, solemn acknowledgement. "That," he said, jerking his head toward the woman, "is Senior Chief Mariana Mako Silva, and she is the real deal, the absolute bona fide platinum-plated real deal." He didn't elaborate further. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the cockpit. The name hung in the air, heavy with implication. Senior Chief, Mako. The cadets were left to their own frantic, whispered speculations. Kyle, his mind racing, pulled out his phone, but there was no signal. He was trapped in a metal tube at 20,000 feet, with the answer to a riddle he was desperate to solve, sitting just 30 feet away. The plane droned on, the hours marked only by the subtle shifts in engine pitch and the gradual darkening of the sky outside the small portholes. As night fell, the interior lights were dimmed to a faint red glow. The cadets, exhausted by the day's emotional roller coaster, began to doze off in their uncomfortable seats. One by one, their heads lolled, their bodies succumbing to the hypnotic vibration of the aircraft. Only Kyle remained awake, his mind churning. He watched the woman, Senior Chief Silva, across the dim bay. She hadn't moved. She was still sitting in the exact same position, a silhouette against the metal wall. It was as if she was carved from stone. He felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. How could anyone sit that still for so long? It wasn't natural. It was unnerving. Suddenly there was a change. A subtle shift in the plane's sound, a slight dip in its trajectory that would have been imperceptible to a sleeping person. Kyle felt it in his stomach. At the same instant, he saw Senior Chief Silva's eyes snap open. In the red glow, they were two dark pools, but they were no longer half-lidded and calm. They were sharp, clear, and scanning. She was instantly, completely terrifyingly awake. It was like watching a predator sense a change in the wind. She rose to her feet in one fluid, silent motion, not a single joint cracking, not a whisper of clothing. She moved toward the bulkhead, placing a hand on the cold metal as if listening to it. Kyle was mesmerized. He watched as she looked toward the cockpit door, her body tense with a readiness that was palpable even from across the bay. A moment later, the cockpit door opened and Chief Williams emerged. His face, usually a mask of gruff authority, was pale and drawn in the red light. He walked straight to Senior Chief Silva, his steps quick and purposeful. They spoke, their voices too low for Kyle to hear, a rapid, intense exchange. But Kyle could see the body language. Chief Williams was reporting. Senior Chief Silva was receiving the information, her face utterly impassive. Then, she gave a single, short nod. Chief Williams's shoulders seemed to relax a fraction, as if a massive burden had just been lifted from him and placed onto someone far more capable of carrying it. The chief then turned and his eyes scanned the sleeping cadets, landing on Kyle, the only one awake. He gestured sharply. "Come here." Kyle's heart hammered against his ribs. He unbuckled his harness and walked across the vibrating metal deck, his legs feeling weak. As he approached, he could see the grim set of the chief's jaw and the unnerving, calm focus in Senior Chief Silva's eyes. So up close, she wasn't just fit, she was carved. The gray t-shirt did nothing to hide the definition of her shoulders and arms, a latticework of dense, functional muscle. "Both port engines are gone," Chief Williams said without preamble, his voice tight. "Bird strike. We're losing altitude. We're not going to make it to the divert field. We're going down." The words hit Kyle like a physical blow. The air left his lungs. Going down. They were going to crash. He looked from the chief to the woman, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. His carefully constructed future, his ROTC ambitions, his whole life, it all telescoped down to this single, terrifying moment. He was just a kid. He was just a scared kid. Senior Chief Silva was watching him. She saw the panic bloom in his eyes, the way his hands started to tremble. As she saw the boy beneath the uniform, she took a half-step toward him, and her voice, when she spoke, was not the flat, cold tone from the tarmac. It was low, calm, and utterly steady. It was a voice that could command the wind and the waves. "What's your name, cadet?" she asked. Kyle," he stammered. "Kyle Evans." "Kyle," she repeated, anchoring him with the sound of his own name. "Listen to me. The chief and I have work to do. We need to get your friends ready. Panic is a luxury we don't have. It's a weight that will pull you down. You need to be my eyes and ears in here. Can you do that?" She wasn't asking if he was brave. She was giving him a job, a purpose. It was the oldest trick in the leadership book, and it was exactly what his shattered psyche needed. He swallowed hard and nodded. The trembling in his hands lessened, just a fraction. Yes, I can do that." "Good man," she said, and for a second the corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of an approving smile. She turned back to the chief. "Chief, how long?" "Maybe 10 minutes. Tops." She nodded again, her mind clearly running through a dozen checklists, 100 contingency plans. She looked around the cargo bay, assessing it not as a passenger, but as a potential survival environment. Her gaze fell on the terrified cadets, still blissfully asleep. "All right, Chief. Let's get them awake. Gently. No need to start the party before the music plays." As Chief Williams moved to rouse the other cadets, Senior Chief Silva turned back to Kyle. "Stay with me, Kyle, and watch. Just watch." In the next 10 minutes, Kyle Evans would get a masterclass in something no ROTC classroom could ever teach. He would see what it truly meant to be a leader. He would see what it meant to be a warrior. The next few minutes were a blur of controlled chaos, a stark contrast to the silent, slumbering plane of just moments before. Chief Williams moved through the rows of webbing, his voice a low, urgent rumble as he shook each cadet awake. Up! Up now! Quietly! The initial confusion on their faces quickly curdled into pure, unadulterated terror as the gravity of the situation sunk in. The plane was noticeably lower, the engine sound a sickening asymmetrical thrum. The red glow of the cabin lights painted their frightened faces in demonic hues. Whimpers escaped some. Sarah grabbed Kyle's arm, her nails digging in, but he barely felt it. His eyes were fixed on Senior Chief Silva. She hadn't moved to the center of the bay to give a speech. She wasn't trying to calm everyone with platitudes. Instead, she had gone to a storage locker near the rear ramp and pulled out a large canvas duffel, the kind used for emergency equipment. She unzipped it with a sharp zip that cut through the noise. Inside were not flashy rescue devices, but practical things: heavy-duty straps, carabiners, a first aid kit that looked more like a field surgeon's kit, several large plastic containers of water, and high-energy ration bars. She began methodically placing these items at strategic points around the bay, near the exits, near the bulkheads. The cadets stared, their panic momentarily suspended by confusion. What was she doing? Why wasn't she saying anything? Finally, one of them, that a boy named David, his voice cracking with fear, shouted over the engine noise, "What are we supposed to do? Are there parachutes? Should we jump?" Senior Chief Silva didn't even look up from her task. "No parachutes on this bird," she stated flatly, securing a water container to a floor ring with a short strap. The news sent a fresh wave of despair through the group. David started to hyperventilate. "We're going to die! Oh, God! We're going to die!" That got her attention. She straightened up and turned to face them. Her expression wasn't angry, but it held a look of such profound disappointment that it was more effective than any shout. "Stop," she said. The single word wasn't loud, but it cut through the din like a blade. David's whimpering choked off. Everyone went silent. At the only sounds, the labored breathing of the plane and the whine of the struggling engines. She walked slowly toward the center of the group, her steps measured on the vibrating deck. "You might die today," she said, her voice matter-of-fact, clinical. "It's a possibility, but panicking guarantees it. It shuts down your brain, locks up your muscles, and makes you a passenger to your own fate. I have no intention of being a passenger, and neither should you." She looked at each of their faces, one by one. Kyle saw her eyes linger on Sarah, on David, on the others, cataloging their fear, their strength, their potential. "Here's what's going to happen," she continued. "We have maybe 7 minutes. We're going to use them. Chief Williams is going to brief you on the crash position. You will listen, and you will do exactly what he says. You will brace. You will protect your head. You will not scream. You will not flail. You will be as still and as strong as you can make your body." She walked over to the large metal bulkhead she had been sitting against. "I will be at that bulkhead. It's the strongest point in this bay. When we stop moving, there will be chaos. There will be smoke, probably fire, and definitely darkness. Your job is to stay in your seats until either Chief Williams or I tell you to move. Do you understand?" A few weak nods. "I need to hear it," she said, her voice sharpening just a fraction. "Do you understand?" "Yes, Senior Chief," Kyle said, his voice surprisingly steady. The others echoed him, a ragged chorus of terrified assent. The plane gave a sudden, violent lurch, dropping what felt like 100 feet in a second. Several cadets screamed. The luggage shifted. The emergency lights flickered. Senior Chief Silva didn't even sway. She was rooted to the deck, her knees bent slightly, absorbing the shock. She looked at Chief Williams. "Chief, get on the horn. See if the pilot has an ETA. I'll get these straps used." For the next 5 minutes, Kyle watched a master at work. While Chief Williams relayed terse instructions from the cockpit, Senior Chief Silva became a whirlwind of focused activity. She had the cadets help her, giving them simple physical tasks to keep their minds occupied. You with the glasses, take this strap and loop it through the floor rings here and here. Make it tight. Good. You, take these blankets and wet them with water from this container. Pass them out. Everyone gets one to cover their mouth and nose. She was a conductor leading a terrified orchestra, turning their panic into directed energy. She showed them the crash position, head down, arms wrapped around their knees, hands clasped behind their neck. She made them practice it. Tuck your head, lower, make yourself as small a target as possible. She walked the line of seats, adjusting a posture here, giving a word of encouragement there. Good, Sarah. That's it. You've got it. Hearing her name, seeing this woman acknowledge her, seemed to steel the girl's spine.